Hi, everyone. Good evening. So I am Negin, and this is Huriye, and Helena doesn't need introduction. It's really interesting because we had this conversation around gender apartheid last year, 9th of March together. We had it like a year before that during your inquiry and the time you were spending on collecting information. But today feels quite different. Like now it's like the whole world is actually need gender apartheid to be ruled as part of international law.
I mean, I don't think that you can talk about human rights at all just now, whether it's in relation to the issue that we're discussing tonight or any human rights issue, without reflecting on the whole way in which our geopolitics is affected by the Trump administration. I mean, we really can't disentangle that because the impact is going to be so huge on the funding of so many of the NGOs, around the world. I mean, there was good stuff going on. Let's be very clear, where money from US AID went to, in Africa, FGM on the ground floor. Lots of projects were receiving some funding. We're not talking about huge amounts of money, but enough to make it possible for them to do their work. The whole business of child marriage, of violence against women in, domestic violence, but also violence in conflict. I mean, the whole business of the stuff that we're seeing just now in the Sudan and Congo. But now, I mean, we're here now to talk about Afghanistan, and I just had a phone call yesterday from a senior judge, British judge, who was involved with us in the evacuation of the women judges at the time of the evacuation in 2021. And after the flights, when we got a whole set of the women out, other judges who hadn't got on to the flights before they were sort of banned by the Taliban, fled sort of overland often with their kids into Pakistan. And they've been in hiding in Pakistan, they've gone through the different things. 2 of them had got visas from the United States of America, and they've been cancelled. They had their bags packed to go, and they've been cancelled. And now, I mean, the threat from the Pakistani end is that they're going to send them back to Afghanistan. And these are women who were in courts where they were imprisoning men for abuse and violence against women and crimes, serious crimes against women. And they're out, and they really have targeted the women who did that. They think they had no right to sit in judgment on men. So, I mean, it's just hellish what is happening.
Huriye Jan, your take. I can talk hours about Iran, but I think let's talk about Afghanistan first because of Helena's story as well. And the situation we are living in, because a lot of people, especially women who left Afghanistan, their needs of aid, as well as all of the human rights organizations, media platforms. What we know about Afghanistan is based on the money that was coming through US mostly.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Negin John and Azadi, for inviting me. Yes, unfortunately, let me put it that way. I think first time when Trump came as a president, he brought the whole shamelessness in political spectrum in such a naked way that after him, so many politicians around the world feel like they can express themselves in a way that before Trump's first period, it was considered like a big, big taboo for many politicians. But unfortunately, that changed everything. And we have seen a pattern across the world, especially, like we saw in Britain, in other Western countries. Of course, I think our parts of the world, we cannot complain because we are living under dictatorship and authoritarian regimes for such a long time. But yeah, since the first time when Trump was the president, he signed the deal with the Taliban in February 2020, which handed over actually Afghanistan to the Taliban, which resulted in the collapse of Republic in August 2021, and we experienced Taliban for the second time. And now, part of his second term, he canceled thousands of Afghans who were eligible to go to the USA, and also much of the US aid funding that was supposed to be used for the humanitarian aid, because more than 80% of the Afghanistan population are dependent on the aid. And especially since Taliban came to power in August 2021, they banned women from accessing to education beyond year 6 and women's employment. The only profession that women are able to perform in Afghanistan under the Taliban is medical doctors and nurses. And they are only allowed to serve women, not anyone else. But all other professions are banned under the Taliban. Even many humanitarian agencies, they are struggling to have their female workers in order to deliver the aid to the women. And at the same time, I think the worst part is that poverty among women have increased significantly. Also, since Taliban came to power in August 21, because education is banned, employment is banned, and also they almost demolished all the laws, and everything is based on the Sharia. And also because we do not have a Sharia codification in Afghanistan, then it is open to interpretation, and that interpretation of Sharia is depend on every individual how they are interpreting that. So this whole situation have impacted all the Afghan population, but significantly women. It's not just about lack of access to education, to employment, to economic opportunities, and also ban on women's movement. It is also that now domestic abuse have significantly increased against women. And because there is a lack of any legal framework, it is so difficult for the women to seek justice. I'm not saying like during the Republic, women were living in a heaven. Women had a lot of issues, and we were suffering from a lot of abuse and domestic abuse. But then we had those legal institutions, those institutions in place who could safeguard women. We had Ministry of Women's Affairs. We had Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. We had like elimination of violence against women prosecutor office. We had like gender departments in every government institution. So all those institutions, and also we had a penal code which was penalizing so many acts of violence against women. We had violence against women code, which was codifying around 27 violence against women as a crime. So now with everything is gone and everything is based on Sharia, so women are suffering in a significant level of abuse, which is somehow instrumentalized and also institutionalized by the governing group.
I think for me, one point that Huria raises, and it's really important, is to understand that women's right is not written on a stone. All of our achievements throughout generations, throughout years, it's easily taken away from us. Now we see it with Trump's administration, even in the US and a lot of countries around the world, it's been wiped out really easily. The word women is banned.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I don't know if any of you saw it, but a friend of mine sent me a message yesterday. But in the New York Times at the weekend, there was a thing that they published that there has been a circulation of a list of words and expressions not to be used. I mean, they're not saying they're banned. They're not using the word ban, but they're saying you're being advised not to use these words in any of your written communications or in anything of sort. Words like, let me just tell you, social justice, LGBT,
Disability.
Disability. Some of it is community. Some of it is just incredible because, of course, what they're saying is these are lefty words. These are left-wing words. These are the words that subversive left-wing people use, and they're to be eliminated. They're not saying they're banned because, of course, they're big on freedom of speech, but not that speech. And so it's really interesting to me that the duplicity of the arguments they make, where we're told that Britain is one of the worst places in the world for protecting freedom of speech, that we're shameful. While Vance is not criticising Russia, he's busy criticising Britain, apparently, for not being so good on freedom of speech when they're busy doing that.
So for me, all of it reminds me a lot of the struggle of women in Iran. This kind of oppression that existed in the beginning of revolution in the 80s, the situation of women in Iran was quite literally like Taliban in Afghanistan right now. Throughout years, they realized they have to kind of create this level of, kind of deniability for themselves and for their oppression. So they created these laws these rights that can be taken away easily from you as a woman. So yeah, banning the word woman, and for a while, actually you couldn't search on Google search and inside Iran and be able to open a website that had the word woman in it. There's so many examples of what Trump and...
I didn't think woman was on the list, the New York Times published. Feminism was. But
feminism was, activism was. I saw a list that had women, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think that mindset that starts with, okay, let's try to strip away all the things that we think is not right, and then create a way. Right now, we cannot even use the word it's banned because they're not saying it's banned. This level of ambiguity around the rules that they're putting in place to oppress. That's exactly how the Iranian government has been implementing gender apartheid in Iran.
Yeah.
As an Iranian woman, you're now allowed, I wasn't, as a child, we didn't have a national sport team for females. I love gymnasium, I love gymnastics, and I wanted to become a national champion. And I had no future. I had no dream of being able to do that. Then 10, 15 years later, that changed, and now you have some sports team that allow women, and they go even to international competitions, they win, they're fantastic. But then the other year we had the captain of female football team was banned from leaving the country by her husband because they had a row in they had an argument inside the house, and the husband decides, I'm going to provoke the right that you can leave the country. And it's easily done for the men. So they're giving women the right to live, but that right is not fundamental right. Yeah. It's a contract sort of situation.
It's conditional.
It's conditional.
On you being a good woman and behaving in an appropriate way.
So if that's not gender apartheid, it's not classifying women and trans women as a...
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is that if you think about it, they make a long list of things. They say, we're not banning it, but we think it's advisable that you don't use these expressions. And you know that every journalist, every civil servant, every person, every teacher is going to be guarding their language. It will have the chilling effect of making you say, oh my God, have I got one of the banned words? Am I displaying, am I showing the kind of woman I am? That's or the kind of politics one might have. That's the point is, because only certain kinds of people would use that kind of language. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think honestly it just reminds me of the Taliban, because since Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, they banned any woman running an NGO, like women who were part of the board of directory of NGOs, they were banned and they were replaced by men. And all NGOs led by women, they were replaced by men. And even many of my friends who were signatory of the banks for their business or for their NGO, they were advised to replace that. Any program, any project that it has the word woman in it, it will not be approved by the de facto authorities, and it has to be changed into people. And this is like, yeah, I think there is a trend that is going on. I don't know whether the right wings are learning from the Taliban or Taliban are learning from Trump, but certainly there is some good learning.
There's a handbook.
Yeah, definitely. I think they are learning from each other.
There's definitely a congruence in the way that they see the world.
Certainly, there might be something, and I wouldn't be surprised that if they are secretly meeting each other and exchanging ideas. Because
well, it's called
like we do. Like we do.
Yeah, certainly, but at least we do publicly, but we are doing it behind the closed doors, and then they say, okay, let's decide how we want to restrict women even further. Do you have any more inventions? Like, I think, honestly, because since Taliban came to power, they have issued over 130 edicts against women at the local and national level, which starts from banning beauty salons to women gym, to the parks,
going to tailors,
to the tailors, to like you just name it. Like, honestly, sometimes it really, really surprises me that are they really being born by a woman? Did a woman give birth to these animals?
Really good question.
What kind of family they were raised into? What kind of teachings they had? Because I believe that anyone who was spending maybe a year of their life with their mothers, they wouldn't disrespecting their own mothers, their own sisters, their own wives and daughters, the way that it is happening in Afghanistan. And I think it is just, like what happens in Afghanistan now, I don't think that anywhere in the world has anyone seen any example of that.
I wanted to ask you about this, the business of doctors. I mean, obviously there are qualified women doctors who qualified. In fact, even during as I understood it, during the period when the Russians had invaded Afghanistan and were controlling things, they did open up certain sort of professional avenues to women like medicine and so on. But there are a cohort of women doctors. But haven't the Taliban recently, I mean, first of all, aren't they the ones that already exist? What happens? Are they allowing for the training of new women doctors? Because the educational channels for that are being closed down because there's going to be no educational opportunities for women. And they've just banned midwifery as something that women can choose to go into as a career to assist other women in the process of childbirth and to train for that. What's happening around that? How are women going to access medical care if the cohort of women who are doctors, who are few anyway, what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, let me make a bit of correction. We had female doctors before Russia invasion in Afghanistan, even, like for many, many years before that. I think the things that changed in early 1980s in Afghanistan, that women were allowed to practice as judges, because before that, we did not have women judges, because under the Islamic jurisprudence, you were not allowed to judge as a woman. We had women prosecutors, but we did not have women judges. And that has changed, but we had plenty of female doctors and, with all other professions, including women ministers and members of the parliament from back, 60s, 50s.
It's important for people to know that history, because people imagine that somehow it only happened in more recent times. Now, I remember that after the ouster of the Taliban the first time round, we're talking about 2003 or 2002, wasn't it? When the coalition of the willing went into Afghanistan first and then Iraq. But after that, there was a sort of reintroduction, because I remember adding my name to wanting to see the conventions protecting women and ending discrimination and all of that, the international conventions, added to create a sort of hybrid law. And to reintroduce women into the law schools who'd been banned from the law schools. So I knew that there had been women lawyers prior to that. Women, the medical schools were reopened to women then because there was the period of during the Taliban. But what I'm asking about is now. You know, I mean, you haven't got huge numbers of women doctors, and women are being denied education. So what's going to happen as the Taliban proceed, if they're going to be remaining in office forever? You know, I mean, we hope that that's not going to happen. We're not going to allow it to happen. But what happens for women giving birth and women who've got cancer, and what's going to happen?
Well, the medical school and nursing schools were the only two institutions that were allowed under the Taliban till last year. And last year, again, probably the exchange with some other right-wing leaders, God knows who, and then they decided, okay, let's ban women from accessing medical schools and nursing. So now the medical schools and nursing are banned for women. So this is what we are asking this question from the Taliban, that what happens if your own woman gets ill? You know, of course, you're not going to take them to the doctors, to the male doctors, and you're not allowing female doctors to, you know, like to have more female doctors, and only the ones that we are already having, so the number are limited. We get really no answer. We really get no answer from that. So even when there was a lot of campaign, let her learn, many Afghans, they created those very creative images, like a woman is giving birth while the birth attendants are the Taliban leaders, Mullah Hibatullah with Haqqani, with a couple of others. They are just standing to give birth to a woman because there is no female doctor. And even none of those could shame them enough to allow at least the medical schools to reopen the medical schools. So this is why, one thing that we, as Afghans, we are quite puzzled, even from the first time of the Taliban, is that why there are so much anti-women and anti-art and literature. Because at least these are the three things that Taliban have always imposed really, really strongly, and which is women, whether it's women access to education, whether it's political participation, anything to do with women, even walking on the street, and having that freedom of movement is, they consider it as a crime. But we don't understand. We don't get it, because part of our culture, part of Afghan culture, we have such a rich history of women's involvement, at so many levels, from many, many old years. Like if you see throughout the centuries, women have played such a significant role as, we had poets, we had, writers, we had warriors, and, so many, if you just name it. But at the same time, art, music, and culture is a significant part of
I'm going to answer you. I'm going to be totally blunt, and I'm going to say there is a war out there. Patriarchy is oppressing women, and it's not just going away. It exists in the people's mind from the birth, and then we grew our children. We make children who are, who are misogynist. It's our fault as individuals that we are not creating children who are educating them in that manner. We are not creating communities and societies that are equal. It's our responsibility as women, as men, and everyone in between, that we haven't created that culture. We allow patriarchy to exist. We allow people like Elon Musk or Trump to be able to be in the public faces and say outrageous things. And it's a backlash that we are seeing now in the US from what happened in the last 20 years in the US and the progress of women's movement. It was a backlash in Afghanistan. It is a backlash in Iran, everywhere around the world. And what can we do now? That's the question.
Well, are you looking to me for the answer?
Yes, you're the one, please.
When you get to be a grand old age like I am, you think I've got the
You've
answers.
seen things more
But you look, one of the things that we know is that this is about hegemony. You know, there are some words that do help us to understand things. The ways in which culture is created is you know, it's always seen as being tradition, and it's coming out of our religious and our great books and all of the holy books and all of that kind of thing, which of course, you know, were male created and male interpreted and used in order to make the laws in nations where, you know, depending on which those great books have such prominence, and women swallow it too. I mean, that's one of the awful things, is that I remember our chambers did a case back in the 80s. No, it must have been the early 90s, and it was about female genital mutilation, and it was Sierra Leone, and a girl who was in her adolescence, just 10 or 11, I think, had been brought here by her mother during the Civil War, and she didn't want to return to Sierra Leone because she knew, she'd heard the women talking and so on about the tradition of female genital mutilation, and at different times there were expressions of concern that she had not had this done to her as a little girl. And she was now a bigger girl, and she said, I'm not going back there to have that done to me. And she was going to school with other girls in Britain and so on, and she knew that this was not necessary or good for women. And so she didn't want to go, and she wanted to remain with her aunt. And she, through lawyers, applied for asylum. And it went all the way through the courts, right up to the Court of Appeal. And there were 2 men and a woman on the Court of Appeal. And that day, that was quite rare to have a woman in a senior judicial role. And the 2 men said, no, this is not this is not persecution of women. Women in Sierra Leone are all in favour of this being done, and in fact, they conduct these procedures often on women. And so this is not about persecuting women. This is about a societal culture. It was cultural. It was all about cultural relativism. You know, that this was a culture that were entitled to make decisions for themselves in whatever way they wanted, and women supported it. And it was very interesting because Mary Arden, the one woman on the court, said, hold on a minute, you know, who make culture? Who get to say what the national cultures are? Where do the roots of that come from? And so she did a minority opinion, but the judgment went against the girl. And then it went to the Supreme Court, or it was then the House of Lords Appellate Court. And fortunately, by that time, so it must have been much later than I'm thinking, but we had one woman on the Supreme Court, and she took up that argument about where does culture of a nation come from. And it's those who have power who determine what culture is, but it becomes so hegemonic in that it feeds into all aspects of life, the mythology and the stereotyping and all the stuff that goes with it. And you have to ask the questions, what was female genital mutilation about? It was about making sure that women as your property were going to be virginal and had not been with other men, and it was to keep them from going with other men. And it was also about what was pleasurable to men, was, you know, that you interfered with, you know, the vagina and the labia and so on. I mean, it was quite clear that it was not in the interest of the women. And so, you know, it's been a process of learning, and now, you know, young women from the communities where this is a tradition are the voices for change, and it has to come from the communities themselves. So when we say, what do we do? What we do is we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep having meetings and talking about it and so on, and spreading the word and getting more and more people to talk about it and to be horrified at the state of it. And we had a meeting, in fact, just last Thursday in the House of Lords, and it was full. I mean, packed to the gills. And these were the discussions we were having about Afghanistan and Iran. And it was mainly it was around that whole issue of gender apartheid, and the thing is to make common the language. You know, let's talk about, let's call it for what it is. Why gender apartheid? Because you remember, I mean, I was active in it, and some of you will have been, that at the time of apartheid in South Africa, it was a horrible horror story that people, because of the colour of their skin, could not be full participants in their society. And their rights were diminished and so forth. And that's what's happening to women
in other places, and indeed continues to happen in more subtle ways, even in advanced democracies that claim themselves to be so great on all this stuff. But we still see ways in which it continues. But gender apartheid in its most, vital form, in the ways that you're both able to talk about, because you're talking about your own places of nationhood, is that women are not treated as equal. And not treated with equal dignity and equal humanity. And the idea that women shouldn't have freedom of movement and freedom of expression and opportunities to mix together and to move as they would want without having to get permissions and so on. And so it's not just, it's also Saudi Arabia, it's also the Gulf, it's also Pakistan, but it's also happening in Western democracies that women's achievements are not recognised, their abilities not recognised in many different ways, and we're seeing rolling back of it, and the right to control your own body, your own life. And so we have to keep the energy level up. That's what I think. And I think that we have to call it out when we see it. And we also have to, this is not an issue for women. This is an issue for men and women who want to make a better world and a non-Trumpian world.
I agree with you, especially at the beginning of the campaign for gender apartheid. There was like voices who were saying, oh, don't broaden it. Don't talk about, the women's right in other places. Let's focus on Iran and Afghanistan and make it something that the other countries are going to come behind it, US, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. I'm like, are we talking about human rights and women's rights? Does it have borders? Are we putting borders and saying, and I love that you brought it up, that it's not just about Iran and Afghanistan. And if we are deciding that it's about Iran and Afghanistan, within 2 years, we are seeing the start of it in the US. We are seeing the impact and, the kind of a ripple effect of what's happening in the US in the rest of the world, and the narrative that is creating, and the money that goes to marketing these kind of narratives. The social media algorithms that are banning women's, and a lot of organizations that have, working on the rights of women, as well as the word gender apartheid. It doesn't get the same interaction as other words. If you're using gender apartheid and using that hashtag, it actually is demised in the algorithm's view.
But that, the word apartheid is a sort of, trigger word, because, people say, oh, but it's owned by South Africa, as in the way that, for example, the word Holocaust is owned by the Jewish community. And so we can't use the word apartheid, but we also know that the word apartheid is being used in relation to how Palestinians are treated in the Middle East. And so the word is itself, has lots of tensions around it for those reasons, because they would like to confine it to South Africa and something in the past, and not something that can actually, with a bit of thinking about what does apartheid mean. It means apartness and keeping certain people apart. And we know that, look at what's happened just now in the United States with the Tate brothers. The idea that the Tate brothers could fly into the United States and there not be an outrage, how dare you think that you can come here and you're criminals and so on, and they should have been arrested immediately and turned around and sent back to, but it wasn't. In fact, it was engineered by certain American people, and the reason why is because they are great social media influencers, and they helped. They say themselves they helped to deliver Trump his majority by speaking to young men and telling young men that women deserve to be kept in their place and treated as sexual objects, and if they give them any trouble that you just sort of half strangle them. We've heard the evidence of women describing the things that these men have done to them and the things that they are actually going on trial for. And the idea that the Trump Republican Party, that crowd of people, are in some way raising them up as people to be protected, it's really a shocker.
Yeah, thank you, Nick and John. Just in regard to your question about the culture, and because it is embedded in our behavior, in our belief, or maybe whatever it is, like if you repeat a lie 10 times, you will believe it yourself. So this is how so many of these so-called cultural practices have been, because it have been repeated on us over the generations, so we came to believe that we are subordinate to the man, or our children have been raised in a way to believe that women are less than men. And this is one of the things. Yeah, I think part of the other problem is it is not just the cultural or behavior or religion or, you know, all those things can play a role in it. But at the same time, many people, men and women, who are rising, who are standing against these practices, they are being terrorized, they are being arrested, they are being raped, they are being detained, they are being disappeared. So then how someone would dare to stand against a gun, you know, and to fight back? Since Taliban have returned to power, there have been like hundreds of protests that have been happening across Afghanistan. Hundreds of men and women have been arrested. Like we had like mass resignation of all university professors, like over 200 university professors across Afghanistan. They resigned collectively because girls were banned from university. Like in many conservative provinces, such as Nangarhar and Kandahar, male students walked out of their classrooms, out of the exams, and they said all or none, we don't want. But then those protests were always met with the guns, with violence, with detention, with disappearances. And then in regard to what you said, Helena, about the, you know, all these justification that happened in that court case, unfortunately, this is still true in the situation of Afghanistan. I have seen many Western diplomats, white men with their ties and collars, who are telling me and lecturing me about my religion, about my culture, and they are telling me what Taliban are doing is part of your culture and part of your religion, and I should accept it. It's me being disobedient, not accepting what the Taliban are trying to tell me or do to me. And unfortunately, this has been going on for such a long time. Even with due respect, there are some international NGOs that are operating in Afghanistan because they receive millions and millions of dollars in the humanitarian aid. They are sugarcoating what's happening in Afghanistan. They keep telling me as if I have came from another planet. They are telling me that, oh, but our organization is working with 6,000 women across Afghanistan, and we don't have any problem with the Taliban. I'm saying, yes, I know that you have 6,000 women. It's in return for 50% of the aid to the Taliban. It is in return of bribery to the Taliban. It is in return of doing favor to the Taliban. It's in return of recruiting members of the Taliban. It doesn't come as cheap, and we do not have that luxury to hire 6,000 women and give 50% of the millions of dollars of aid back to the Taliban to allow us to work. And then the other problem that some of these organizations are having, like whether they do it knowingly or unknowingly, like since Taliban have returned to power, thousands of professional women who were engineers, who were journalists, who were lawyers, who were teachers, who were like, you know, working in different fields, now they are all turned and being trained by some of these international NGOs to become tailors, to become carpet weavers, to become bakers. Can you believe like they are simply engineering, re-engineering our brains? They are telling us that we are just good in doing embroidery, not being an engineer. They are telling us that we are just good at weaving the carpet, not being a journalist. They are telling us that you're only good to go to the kitchen and do the bakery. You're not good to be a teacher. They are simply re-engineering our brains, and the way that in another 10 years, I'm afraid that no woman will find themselves being capable of taking any professional you know, job.
I mean, it's so important. I agree. Absolutely.
Definitely. And, you know, having women like you and a lot of amazing Afghan women.
Yeah,
So.
no, I mean, we've all learned from Huria.
Yeah, I think the mic is going around now, and we're going to open it up, and then if you have any questions, so you can put your hands up. Oh, yeah.
So Ashley's coming on that way.
Yes,
there's one here and one, two over
Lots of
there.
hands, that's great.
Thank you so much for this really impassioned, insightful, and inspirational conversation. What do we to make of American women voting for Trump? So that this is, of the many, many depressing aspects of this election, it's possibly one of the most depressing, because these are women who are free to make their choices in an advanced democracy, okay, clearly eroding now, but so they have the power to make their choices, they have the information to make their choices, and yet they have helped to unleash this calamity on women everywhere in the world, and they voted for the bros. What are we to make of this, and how do we push back against it?
If I go first, it's a really good question, because I think both of us in both Iran and Afghanistan, and I'm sure in the rest of the world, we experience that as women, because for us, we've been told for over and over again, our rights is not priority. So when that woman is going to the ballots, they're thinking about other things that are important to them. They don't even think about their rights being a fundamental thing, and that's how patriarchy works. At the same time, this has been going on for centuries, and generations and generations. So we learn to be obedient. We learn to look around us and see what the power is telling us. Who are the men in our world that are, in the position of power and telling us how to think? I think a lot of those women, they haven't been able to think for themselves. Yes, they have the freedom of going down the streets without wearing the mandatory hijab like Afghan or Iranian women, but are they truly free? Are they truly thinking for themselves? Or is just following the hints that the capitalist society has been giving to them on a daily basis and telling them, oh, if you're beautiful, if you're dressed nicely and your skin is fascinating, then you can go up the ladder and come. And this is the type of women that Trump is hiring as well. It's changing the way that women are perceived in the public face as well. Look at the people around him. The beauty of the woman is an important part of the hiring, and that's really ridiculous. And that's another way of oppressing women in my view.
Oh, sorry, yes. The other thing is that, you're absolutely right about many of those women were looking at the economics of it and thinking, I can't afford to feed my children well, and the food prices are so high. And of course, there's very little adequate conversation, public conversation, about why those things are the way that they are, and who is it that is being enriched by certain kinds of economic systems. That there is a whole business about how economies everywhere work. But for women, that business of telling us what good womanhood looks like is so part and parcel of how women develop and grow up, of what we're receiving. And so of course, there's this notion that they keep being told by their menfolk that a strong man is going to solve all the problems, and so I think that many of those women looked around and thought, well, we need somebody to come in here and take control of everything and get something sorted. And that was the sell, which is, of course, a big lie. I want to remind everybody, in the run-up to the 2016 election, which Trump won the first time round, there was the whole business of his... It was not. It was the run-up to the election that Biden won, although Trump says he didn't win it. But in the run-up to that one, do you remember that Trump sent people to Qatar to negotiate with the Taliban? This is Mr. Dealmaker, who's such a great negotiator. He did a negotiation with the Taliban. If you get in and there's a change, because I'm going to withdraw all the American troops, because that was his big sell
to the American public. I'm stopping all wars. We're not sending our men off to spending money on wars. We're not going to do that. We're going to bring it all back home again, and we're taking all our troops home, and we're not putting them in harm's way. And I'm going to deliver that. But in order, he recognized that to deliver it, he was warned, that might mean that the Taliban will get back in. Well, I mean, so he meets with the Taliban. He sends his folk to meet the Taliban. And the deal that he did was, because that was what was being argued for, was if the Taliban are going to get back in again, they have to make sure that women are still part of the deal. And he claimed that, that he made part of the deal that women's education was guaranteed. Well, I have to tell you that as I listened to him claiming that, that Mr. Putin listens to everything that he says, and when Mr. Putin says that he will withdraw and he will end his hostilities towards Ukraine, would you believe it? This is the guy who gave us the Taliban, and he did, because what happened was, then of course Biden felt he had to match him, had to also withdraw all the troops at great speed, and you ended up opening the doors to the Taliban's return. Trump was responsible for that. Let's be very clear. I mean, I'm not letting Biden off the hook either, because I think that he was collusive in it all, but the deal was done, and it empowered the Taliban to feel, once we get them out, we're on the road into Kabul. So I mean, the horror of all of that, the selling of women's rights away so easily, is a disgrace, and the removing just now of aid from so many things which were producing some decent outcomes for women in parts of the world where there's so little. I mean, it's absolutely shameless what they've come in and done, freezing projects in Africa which were about child marriage, which were about FGM, which were about so much stuff, you know, women's infant mortality, women's mortality in childbirth, lots of that stuff, HIV and AIDS. I mean, it's disgusting.
It's disgusting. I think there's one on the first, and then...
Yeah, I just want to take, you just mentioned, Helena, about women's mortality in childbirth. Historically, the biggest threat to women's lives has been dying in childbirth, historically. Men's dying in a war, obviously. So what's going to happen to the birth rate in Afghanistan with no professional midwives and no female doctors? A huge number of women are going to die, and their babies are going to die. Do you think that's going to make a difference to alter the Taliban's attitude to these things? They're going to have to allow women to train again?
No, unfortunately, because back in 2001, when Taliban were overthrown first by the US and coalition forces, at that time, Afghanistan was having one of the highest maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate between the age of 0 to 5 years. It was highest in the world. Later on, we were taken over by Sierra Leone, and we became the second. So that pattern, unfortunately, remained for quite few years, even after the Taliban were gone, because then so many health infrastructures, female doctors, and things had to put in place, because Afghanistan was not just what the Taliban did. We had Russia invasion from 1979 till 1992. Then we had a period of civil war and Taliban. So it was like a whole catastrophic, 2-3 decades, which left so many infrastructures being destroyed. But then now we are just going back to the same situation, because we receive a lot of reports of not just maternal mortality rate, we also receive high number of suicides among women, especially young women and girls. And this is because, especially when Taliban banned girls from attending medical school, we at least had 36 confirmed cases of suicide by the female medical students across Afghanistan, from which at least 6 or 7 of them died, and the rest were, they were revived. And what is really also shocking that whenever we speak to the diplomats, especially with the United Nations, they are telling us that, oh, Afghanistan under the Taliban is now peaceful. We don't have war. We don't have civilian casualties. We don't have people dying as it was used to before August 2021. And I'm always asking, who was making the war before the August 2021? It was the Taliban who were killing people. So why you are rewarding the killer for not killing us anymore?
He kills you in a different way.
And exactly. And then the other, as you said, sorry, Nick and John, like, and then the other issue is that women's mortality doesn't count as casualties. Women dying every day because of lack of medical, access or medical equipment or medicine and whatever, and then from abuse, from violence, and the cases of homicide and femicide has significantly increased, and it doesn't count, unfortunately, and that is coming from the United Nations. It is not coming from anyone else. It's not coming from a Taliban, a man with a bushy beard and with a turban. So we have a proverb in Farsi. We are saying, if you want to prevent a meat from spoiling, you add salt in it. And then what would you do if the salt itself spoils? So now if the UN is stinking, then what is the hope for the rest of the people?
I know we have like loads of more questions, so we're gonna try to be short and then.
Okay. Thank you for all of your fascinating and important statements. I had a question about Pakistan that you mentioned earlier and their role in either supporting or challenging the gender apartheid in both Iran and Afghanistan as a border nation. Thank you.
Well, I mean, all I can tell you is that the women judges that are there in hiding, I mean, the accounts I'm getting is that the presence of, if you like, the Taliban Pakistan version is a problem for them too. I mean, unfortunately, Pakistan also has its own problems with that kind of extremist, fundamentalist interpretations of Sharia law, which are, designed to hold women in their place. And Haria will tell you that, that's their reading of Sharia law, which is always counter to women. And as indeed were laws, the jurisprudence in early times deriving from Christianity weren't very nice about women either, let's be sure. Any fundamentalism, whether it's Christian fundamentalism, Jewish fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism, almost invariably is pretty hostile and negative for the experience of women. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. And also I think in regard to Pakistan, unfortunately, we haven't seen much of the support for the campaign of gender apartheid, especially among Pakistani civil society, which we were expecting. Like, Pakistan has such a vibrant civil society, especially women groups are really, really strong. Only like we have individuals supporting us, but it never came as a, the same way, like, for example, we have the support of Iranian civil society. It didn't come, not just Pakistan, but from other Islamic countries too. Like, I don't want to just pinpoint one country and say everyone else is supporting us. No, unfortunately. Even for the case that was put in front of the ICJ by the Germany about violation of Afghanistan on the CEDAW Convention, Morocco was the only Islamic country that was supported us, but it didn't come from any other Islamic country.
You've got to remember that the rapporteur on ending violence against women and girls would not support gender apartheid.
Yeah, and also CEDAW committee.
She's a Jordanian woman, and she's a very, liberated Jordanian woman, but she feels that this is going to be seen as being hostile to Islam and to Sharia generally, and so she is very reluctant to be supportive.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really interesting conversation. I'm a feminist legal scholar myself, been researching gender-based violence for a long time, and my question to you is, the term gender apartheid, I think, is really powerful, but how do we make it enforceable? I mean, at the moment, gender persecution is not a ground for, in the Genocide Convention, it's not listed as a ground for persecution, so gender doesn't exist practically in the Genocide Convention. We still don't have a convention that prohibits violence against women at the UN level. So like, how do we make this legally enforceable, that term? How do we ensure that something actually happens and really changes for women fundamentally? Thank you.
Can I just answer that very quickly, which is that as you know, there are the sort of, if you like, the two parallel ways in which you can get things before courts. There's the International Court of Justice, which is a court where states take things against other states, and the International Criminal Court, which allows for the prosecution of individuals who cause human rights violations and atrocities. And so that's why you've seen recently the issuing of warrants by the International Criminal Court against Netanyahu, as well as Hamas, but also against Putin for the taking of the children from Ukraine, and now they're developing other war crimes. They've recently put the Taliban under warrants for their crimes against women. And so there are things that are being done in the courts around the ways in which gender persecution is criminalized by the International Criminal Court. And they're looking at that. You're looking as if that you don't agree with that. I'm telling you that we've just... Yeah, and so, but let me just say that on gender apartheid, there are sort of two avenues. One is that for a number of years there has been campaigning to create crimes against humanity as something that is covered by the ambit of the International Court of Justice. And so what those who are sort of involved in campaigning on this are seeking to have gender apartheid added as one of the crimes against humanity, right? So that journey, but the journey to get that through, do you think that the Chinese are going to approve of it? Do you think the Russians are going to go with it?
Or America?
What? Or the United States now. I mean, they're not going to agree to anything. And then the second thing is that the Rome Statute, which has created the International Criminal Court, a much younger court. It was, you know, it's only existed now for 25 years. That court hasn't got gender apartheid included in the list of crimes. And so there's a campaign which would be to get all the countries which have signed up to the Rome Treaty to create the International Criminal Court, that they should agree to an amendment which would include gender apartheid. That's another piece of hard work when, as we've just heard, whole sets of countries that have... No.
Yeah, as a crimes against humanity.
And included in the list of crimes that are covered that the ICC can do. So you see, gender persecution is included in that Rome Treaty list. And that's why we've gone down the road of already arguing the case for gender persecution. But what one wants to see, what's the difference, you're going to ask me? Surely it's what's happening to women just now in Afghanistan would amount to persecution. But the thing is that it is different. The idea of apartheid is that it's something how much more all-encompassing, that you can't even hold down certain jobs, that you can't get an education, that you're not allowed to travel without getting permissions, that you're not allowed to sing. They've now got an edict saying that women's voices should not be heard singing or expressing sort of public joyfulness. I mean, there's something hellish about that. And so it's the all-encompassing nature of that, some of which individually sound rather trivial, not being able to go to the beauty parlour. But it's in the beauty parlour that women exchange information about the menopause and about childbirth and about the whole business of how you might avoid getting pregnant and stuff like that. I mean, that's how women have always shared. In my mother's life, it was in the public wash house in Glasgow that you shared all that stuff. You know, in the steamy, it was called. I mean, women found ways of sharing, and they're preventing even those possibilities. And that's why gender apartheid is different from the definitions that have been used for persecution.
Lovely. Next question. There's one here. Yeah. One here and then one there.
Hi. Thank you so much for the great conversation. Baroness Kennedy, you did this the great parliamentary report and inquiry on gender apartheid and made some recommendations. Just going back to what you just said, is the UK government going to take a leading role and push it in the international court to recognize gender apartheid as a crime against humanity, or you think this current government is not taking it into favor at all?
I don't get any impression that this government is interested in doing that. I really, you know, they don't. I mean, the starting point is to embrace the language, and you do not hear the front bench, the cabinet ministers, any of them using the language of gender apartheid. And they don't want to do it, and that's on the advice of the Foreign Office, is that, you know, this is complicated, we don't want to upset South Africa, we don't want to upset Israel because they don't like the word apartheid being used outside of that limited context. We don't want to fall out with Saudi Arabia and places like that that are doing more or less the same thing. Let's wrap that one up and stay still far away from it. So we're getting nowhere at the moment with the British government.
There's one here and then there.
Yeah, I think so. We've got time for one more audience question, I think.
More.
But before we do that, we want to ask a question from our conduit community, which is, in the face of all the things that you've discussed tonight, is there something that gives you hope on a way to move forward and sort of hope for progress on these issues?
Go on. Let's have a hope moment. Go on.
Oh, well,
There was a sigh,
yeah,
and then there was
the
hope.
moment we became hopeful, then another Trump or Elon or Mullah Hibatullah or, you know, someone else is taking the power. Yeah, definitely I think there are moments that I lose my hope and I feel that all I see is the darkness. But certainly I think what really makes me hopeful is that in my lifetime I have seen so many dictators collapse. I have seen so many authoritarian regimes, you know, decollapse. And that gives me the hope that, you know, the change will come. I don't know if the change will come in my lifetime, but I really hope. And if I don't have the hope, believe me, I will stop my activism and I will just crawl at the corner of my home. But there is the hope that keeps me motivated.
I think you've heard the sentence, hope is a discipline. It's a famous quote. But apart from that, I think for me, is seeing those amazing younger generation in Iran and Afghanistan and the women who are still every day are taking to the streets, disobeying the law, doing their daily resistance seriously. If that's not hope, what hope is?
Well, I mean, you've got it summed up there by both my colleagues on the platform. I mean, as Huria was saying, you know, it's amazing. Just remember that suddenly, you know, the collapse of the Soviet Union and, you know, the Berlin Wall coming down. I mean, I don't know if you, I mean, I wasn't expecting it. I was producing a baby at the time and I suddenly, you know, the news came on the radio and it was sort of unbelievable to me. And apartheid and the ending of that. And this business recently in Syria, you know, where suddenly you got Assad being ousted. Things happen. And that's the great joy of it, is that suddenly the cards can fall. The cards that Trump's always talking about, his cards are really going to be numbered, I'm telling you. But I do think that we have to believe that the majority of people in the world are good people. I don't believe that the world is full of awful and terrible people. I believe that on the whole, folk want better things, and if we speak to the better parts of people, you get good outcomes. And so we have to keep talking the talk and telling people that there is a better world and that we can put it together in a different way.
Thank you so much. I have always believed that education is fundamental, and it applies as much to us. I heard some Afghani women who'd made a film saying, why are you women in the West who have a voice are not speaking out? It took me a long time today to find out what the Tate brothers are up to. It was not in the news, being celebrated apparently. So you've got two things. You've got the Tate, he's an incredibly intelligent and clever and articulate man. So people need to be educated, but at the same time you've got Musk and I think we underestimate the bots, the algorithms that perpetrate and make up. I think if you looked at how much hatred is out there and how much of it is generated, that's the thing I'm really concerned about. And I may be being over-optimistic, I think. But it's about education, and we in this country. I looked at something the other day. It's a group of men getting together to do something about something with 3 women, and Van der Leyden was in the middle. Men, yet again. You know, we have to set an example, Helena, do we not? And you said we have to call it out when we see it all the time.
And we've also got to have women in all these conversations. I mean, I looked around that table. I mean, not only was it a disgrace that Trump put together a thing in Saudi Arabia which excluded, you know, Ukraine when they were talking about negotiating a peace deal. But there wasn't a single woman there. You know, most of these things, there's not a woman in sight putting in the arguments for what happens to families, to children, and so on. And women, like the women in this room, you know, I mean, women who are going to, you know, call out what's happening. But also, you know, the businesses, the guys in this audience are the men that we love and that we know care about the things that we care about and want to create the kind of world that we're talking about, where there isn't intolerance and horrible, you know, discriminations and so on. You know, I mean, I hate all this business where we end up having even the women's movement dividing over stuff. It's really important that we come together and call for something better. I mean, we really must.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for all of you to be here and showing the support. It actually means a lot to us. And also, I'm just going to thank the volunteers at Azadi Network. Through the last 2 years, you've been amazing. You've done so much for us, for the community. I think on behalf of Afghan and Iranian women, thank you. Thank you so much.